I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. The first season of Cold focused on the unsolved disappearance of a woman named Susan Powell. I took you behind the scenes of the investigation with secret audio recordings and case files. Now I am back with a new story and a new season, seeking justice for another missing woman, Joyce Yost. Follow Cold right now for free on Amazon Music or ask your Echo device to play the Cold podcast.
If money affects your life in any way, Money Making Sense will talk about it. Be financially healthy, wealthy, and wise. Here's your host, Heather Kelly.
Welcome to Money Making Sense, the show that talks about all things money. Today we're talking about food. And how expensive is it? Or not, depending on where you eat it. Joining me today is David Page. He is the author of Food Americana and the creator of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. So welcome to the show, David.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, you didn't start out in food. What made you decide to get into food from a completely different career?
Well, in broadcasting, you're always the last thing you did. So sequentially, I've been a local reporter, an investigative reporter, a network producer, and eventually a food journalist. What happened was I had been at ABC News, had left, and at the time I was senior producer of Good Morning America, the guy in the control room, and started looking around for a way to keep making a living. And Al Roker of the Today Show had a production company that was providing shows to the Food Network. Now, Al and I were friends because at one point I had run the Weekend Today Show when he was the talent on the Weekend Show. So I called him up and said, hey, you got any work for me? I ended up doing some work for the Food Network through Al, including a history of diners. Moving forward, I began pitching things to the network myself, remarkably unsuccessfully. There was a very kind woman who kept taking my calls and saying, no. One day we're on the phone, and she says no to something, and then she says, haven't you got anything else about diners? And I said, well, sure. I've been developing the show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. This was a Thursday or a Friday late in the day. She said, well, look, get it to me Monday. Get me a write-up because we have a meeting on Tuesday. So I had not been developing a show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. I had just invented that name out of thin air at that moment. And I spent the weekend calling people in and around the food industry and then wrote up a show and gave it to them. And first they bought a special, then they bought the series. But I guess I kind of stumbled into food because that's what was the available channel for me. And let's face it, storytelling is storytelling.
Right.
It helps that I have always loved to eat. And that having been in Europe for a number of years, I had a considerably broader interest in and palate for food than I had before I went over. So it was a convergence of right subject, right time, right place. Okay.
I love that. I've been working on this idea for the next 3 days.
Well, hey, look, when I first went over to Roker, his vice president wanted me to do an hour for them. And after we signed the paper, she said, you have done hours before. And I lied and said, of course I have. But hey, it worked out fine.
This is how you get a job if you don't have one at the moment.
Correct. Can you do that? Of course I can.
Of course you can. And then you go to YouTube or Google and figure out how you do it. You get into Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. How lucrative is this as a producer? I know that the hosts, they're usually take home most of the money, but as a producer, were you able to, after 10, 12 years, retire and never have to worry about making any more money?
Well, you go right for it. How much did you make, Dave? Cable is not as lucrative as other forms of television. And as a newcomer, you don't have a whole lot of bargaining position. It is a better living than is available to most people. And I was able to send my daughter to Columbia Graduate School and Columbia undergrad because I didn't want to have any extra money sitting around the house. It's a fine living. It is not anything like selling CSI to CBS.
Okay. And I would imagine at the beginning, I mean, the Food Network, when you were pitching this Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, it was still a pretty young network. They didn't have a lot of high production value, I would say.
It had got, by the time I got there, it had gotten to the point where they were competitive in terms of production value as they had moved out of the studio somewhat. But no, like most basic cable when they started, it was stripped down, as was the whole cable business. I mean, I lived in Minneapolis for a while, which early on was a cable programming hotbed because it was a non-union state and productions could be done cheaply. Over the years, what has happened is cable has become of interest to the big boys like Fremantle, and the prices have gone up. Although I will say, interestingly enough, the big dog in cable has very recently revised the ground rules. Now that Discovery owns the Scripps networks, they have a virtual monopoly on lifestyle.
Oh, yeah, they own everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It used to be, in my day, that you would agree on a budget for a show and the network would pay you the money in chunks as you went along, but they would fund the production. Nowadays, I am told that if you work with Discovery, they will connect you with a bank or lending organization that will loan you the money on which you pay interest to produce the show for the network, that the network is no longer funding, which is pretty painful for boutique-sized operators such as myself. Although I'm not producing television as a main anything anymore. I've really moved on to books.
This is a good place to take a break because when we come back, I want to go into the actual food aspect and what you learned about food. So we'll be right back with David Page. He is the author of Food Americana and the creator of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives.
Advertising can be one of the hardest parts of running a business. Audience in Motion is here to help. Arm your business with our state-of-the-art ad tech priced to fit budgets of all sizes. Contact your local Audience in Motion representative to learn more today at audienceinmotion.net.
Welcome back to Money Making Sense, the show that affects your life in any way, money-wise. We're talking about it. And today we're talking about food and what that means, either eating out or cooking at home. Joining me today is David Page. He is the author of Food Americana and also the creator of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
In that first segment, we just discussed a little bit about your background, how you got into food. But you mentioned that you spent a lot of time in Europe and really picked up a liking of food. Myself, I became a vegetarian 30 years ago, and back in the day, restaurants didn't serve vegetarian food, or if they did, it was one item, and that was something with eggplant on it, and that was it. And they very rarely made it well.
You lived on grilled cheese sandwiches and potato chips.
Yes, I did. So I took up an interest in food so that I could cook it for myself and actually survive and not just on pasta. What is it that you have learned about food and, more importantly, like the expenses around food?
Well, sociologically, I have come to believe that food is the key to a culture. When I was not first married, my daughter was 7 or 8. We're having a conversation. She says to me, "Dad, how come every time we talk about a place, you talk about the food?" Well, because that's how social interaction takes place. People sit around eating and talking, and the development of their foodways will often say a lot to you about the development of their culture. Obviously, I got the opportunity when I was working in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East for NBC to sample all kinds of food. And one of the things I realized was, with few exceptions, I appreciate every foodway. I'm a little behind the times on offal. organs. I like some of them. There's some things that are a bit too, shall we say, basic for me. But every culture has something in it at the dinner table that I end up adoring. Now, my figure shows that. I'm not svelte, but I consider eating good food to be a joy of life. I have over the years come to prefer the opportunity to eat well, if simply, as opposed to grabbing so much of what's now prepackaged, defrosted, microwaved, and passed off as chain food. Although, every now and then there's nothing wrong with a quarter pounder.
And it is different. I had this experience traveling throughout Europe as well. There are restaurants out there, but here in America, like we have the big chains. We have, there's Chili's and, some of the big Italian restaurants that are nationwide, and it's pretty generic food, even though they claim to be Italian or Mexican. But in traveling in Europe, you go to an Italian restaurant and it's the cook that's lived there for their entire lives and are cooking regional foods. We're starting to see that more in America in some areas, but it's more widespread in Europe, I would say.
Oh, absolutely. But we have that whole homogenization issue in the United States, which is we demand everything everywhere at all times. Strawberries in season are great. Strawberries out of season taste like the box they're in. Yeah. And yet we expect to get strawberries at all times everywhere. Our regional foods, we have regional foods in areas that are the same size as European countries. The barbecue in North Carolina and the barbecue in Central Texas are quite different. But over the past few years, we've begun to move those foods nationally. Pretty much every regional item of every kind is now available everywhere. Is it great to have a lobster roll in Utah, by the way? My book includes Freshies, which sells lobster rolls in Park City and Salt Lake, and which was named the best lobster roll on earth by Down East Magazine. But Ruth Reichel, famed food writer, says to me, she only wants to have her lobster rolls in Maine. Well, is it good or bad? Freshies apparently makes an excellent lobster roll. Do you get the experience of sitting on the wharf? No. Might it be better fresh off the boat? Yes. Is that enough of a reason to keep all of you Utahns? What are you, Utahns? Utahns from enjoying it? I don't know. It's the reality of life is that regional food is now national food in the United States.
Yeah. The Freshies, I've seen that review as well. And the issue that people from Maine or who live on coastal areas that can get the fish fresh off the boat is waiting 24 hours is the freshest you can get it in the state of Utah. There's no way around that. It's going to be 12 to 24 hours.
Except to my understanding, and I don't know this for a fact, but they're selling processed lobster meat, which means fresh off the boat, it's sent to a processor where it is cooked and either shrink wrapped, fresh, or frozen. So how much flavor do you really lose? I don't know. The fact is most of America eats processed lobster and lobster rolls.
Yeah.
I grew up in New England. I enjoyed my lobster on the coast in Maine as a kid when we vacationed. That would still be my favorite way to have a lobster. But next time I'm in Utah, I'm going to go to Freshies.
I'll take you there. I won't eat
it's
it
because
I'm
Great.
a
Excellent.
vegetarian, but I'll watch you.
You can enjoy the bun.
There you go. All right. Have you done a comparison of the cost for people to eat out in a restaurant versus at home? Because this last year, I think, has really brought it home for people. In the pandemic, right at the beginning, so many restaurants had to shut down. Now, they very, very quickly adapted to delivery or letting people just pick everything up at their front door. But a lot of people had to all of a sudden start cooking at home that hadn't been doing it before. So have we done any type of cost analysis of the difference between eating out versus cooking at home?
Okay. The greatest disparity is between delivery from a restaurant and home cooking. It's almost 5 times more expensive to order a delivered meal than it is to make it at home. If you use a meal kit instead, it's still almost 3 times as expensive as cooking from scratch. Look, there's no way around the fact that cooking at home is always going to be cheaper than food from or at a restaurant. What's interesting, however, is while the amount of money spent on meals out of home, as it's referred to, has gone down significantly, the number of meals ordered has gone down significantly in the past year. The amount of money spent on grocery food has gone up because just as the pandemic kicked the guts out of restaurants welcoming guests, it also affected the supply chain of food and the demand for food from groceries. So the cost of groceries has gone up pretty substantially over the past year and hasn't yet completely gone down.
Yeah.
Now, if you're not going to cook at home, you can mitigate some of the costs, for example, from delivery. Ordering third-party delivery is the single most expensive way you can get a meal.
When you say third party, you're talking like DoorDash,
Uber Eats, Grubhub, because those guys charge you service fees, delivery fees, and a driver tip. So you can spend $35 for a $24 meal easily. A number of restaurateurs have been complaining because you're not the only one who pays. They also pay a percentage for each order. So I've seen some write-ups in the food trades in which restaurant owners are pretty much begging their customers to order directly from them. A number of them have put in their own delivery, as pizzerias have often done, and are charging less for it, so you end up paying less.
Yeah, because if any listeners don't know, even before the pandemic happened, restaurants, their margin of profit is so slim. That's why so many go under, whether you're in a pandemic or not. And then if you add these third-party delivery companies, the restaurants now pay 5, maybe even up to 10% to that delivery company, and so they're losing money on that deal. And then now in the pandemic, they're losing money because they're not getting as many customers. They can't get them into the door, so it's been a struggle.
The best financial proposition for both ends of the spectrum, for the restaurant and the customer, is drive-through, because the restaurant is not losing money serving you a meal through a window. And if you're willing to get in your car and spend the gas, you're not paying delivery charges. Understand, by the way, that the same meal that you order in a restaurant, if it's delivered off their online menu, in many cases they add money. They up the fee. You pay more online than you pay in the restaurant. And many restaurants that have never had drive-thrus are now restructuring to include them, because consumer behavior is not going to, according to the experts I've been speaking to, is not going to bounce completely back. You're going to see a significant continuation of the consumer shift toward drive-through and delivery, as opposed to in-restaurant seating over the next certainly year and maybe more, which is not to say that people are not returning to restaurants. Spring sales, at least anecdotally, according to an article I read, are looking better for sit-down restaurants than they have. But the concept of curbside delivery, the concept of drive-through, the concept of delivery at home, the experts are telling me that that's going to be around for quite some time, that things are never going to be quite as they were.
Yeah. And going back really quickly to the price of food in the grocery stores going up, I know everybody everywhere, they had the toilet paper shortage right when the pandemic started. I don't know if you noticed this or not, but in Utah, you could not find flour or yeast in any grocery store here for a good 4 months. And even now, it's been a year, I went through the aisles and yeast was still missing. And when I asked one of the clerks, I'm like, hey, can I get a packet of yeast? They're like, oh, no, it's like on hold from the pandemic. I'm like, really?
I immediately signed up for the Amazon online monthly delivery of toilet paper and paper towels. And on the 15th of every month, I get 2 big boxes. And that was my defense mechanism. I figured the food itself, I could find something.
Okay. All right. We need to take one more break. When we come back, we'll wrap everything up and talk a little bit about this book that David Page has. It's called Food Americana. We'll be right back.
It's the story of an American held in a dark Venezuelan prison.
They're saying that they want to kill me. They're saying that they want me as their guarantee.
I'm Becky Bruce. I spent the last year working on Hope in Darkness. Find it wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome back to Money Making Sense, the show that talks about all things money. Today we are talking about food. How much does it cost if you're eating out, if you're making your own? Joining me today is David Page. He is the author of Food Americana, and he's also the creator of Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. So welcome back, David.
Thank you very much.
The last couple of segments we've talked about how you got into food. Some of the expenses are whether you're eating out or in, but we forgot to talk about how much food is wasted, especially if you are trying to cook for yourself at home. How much are Americans wasting every year?
According to a study in the American Journal of Agricultural Economics, the average U.S. household wastes 31.9% of its food. That's $240 billion a year, $1,866 per house.
$1,800 per household?
Per household, yeah.
Well, why is it that people are not eating what they're buying?
Well, part of it's there's no menu planning. You know, so many people, you open the fridge, you look inside, you pull something out, that's that. And you tend to lose track of what's in there. Secondarily, a lot of people think there's value in shopping at the shopping clubs like Costco, and there can be, but not if you buy large amounts of food that's going to spoil,
right?
And that you then end up throwing out. So it's a question of, in my opinion, personally, I shop more often now because when I load that fridge up, I come back a week later and I find something in the back of it that I should have cooked last Thursday, and it just doesn't look appealing at this point. So
yeah,
you're only saving if you eat it.
Yeah, I tried the food kits, the ones that come, and because I didn't want to waste food, and they say, hey, we'll just deliver to you the exact amount that you need in each recipe. And first of all, those were a lot more expensive than I anticipated per serving. I thought, $10 per serving is ridiculous. I can make $1.50 per serving meal that tastes just fine. But I was like, but I don't want to waste. Guess what? I did. I wound up wasting some because I would get busy. And like you said, a week later, I'm like, there was one of these meals that I forgot to cook. And now half the produce in it is, in my opinion, not good enough to eat.
Part of the problem, and again, this is personal. Do you want to cook? Do you not want to cook? But somehow we have turned cooking for many people into an onerous chore that seems to have to take forever. It doesn't take forever.
Right.
If you want a really good chicken, better than that rotisserie thing, get a chicken, put it in the oven, come back later, take it out. You've got dinner, and then you've got soup, and then you've got leftovers, and you've got sandwiches. And part of the waste problem is failure to use leftovers, by the way.
Yeah.
The quickest dishes are often made out of leftovers, and people just don't do it.
And to me, they taste so much better. There's a day or two for those flavors to meld.
Oh, yeah.
And it just tastes so much better. But I have friends that God forbid you'd say leftover. Oh my gosh, that's a dirty word in their mind. And I don't understand that thinking.
Either do I. But then again, when I lived in Europe, I was on the road continuously. So I actually bought an entire kitchen when I lived in Germany, because apartments don't come with kitchens. You either buy the appliances and cabinets from the previous tenant, or you buy your own. When I moved to Frankfurt, I moved into a brand new apartment. I had to buy an entire kitchen. I left 4 years later, never having once cooked in that kitchen, which is what spurred me to begin cooking when I moved back to the States.
Wow.
I thought, this must be something interesting. Let me try it. And it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Look, it depends on the menu, and it depends on what is important to you. I'm going to have turkey chili tonight. It's going to take me 20 minutes to saute onions and garlic, and then throw in a couple of pounds of ground turkey, spice it, heavy on the cumin, put the top on, keep it real slow, and come back in an hour and a half, and there's dinner. I mean, it depends on what you cook, but to me, that's nothing. That's no time at all.
Yeah.
And that is one cheap meal.
Oh, that's good. Do you talk about that in your book, Food Americana? Like how to get meals sort of on the cheap and semi-quickly?
I don't, although that's a good future book. Okay. What I do talk about in Food Americana is why we eat what we eat, where it came from, and what's happening to it. The fact is, our national cuisine, and this is interesting, not to get political, but in a time of great controversy over immigration, we built a national cuisine out of foods entirely from other countries or cultures. Yeah. Even that which would be considered to have initially come from America, such as oysters and lobsters, the settlers had to be taught how to cook them and how to incorporate them into a diet by the Native Americans. Everything else came from someplace else. Yeah. Barbecue, as American as you can get, basically was created with the flavorings and techniques of enslaved African Americans. Certainly our favorite cuisines, Mexican, Chinese, and pizza, obviously came from someplace else, although Mexican's interesting. Mexican initially was not brought here by immigrants. We changed the border after the Mexican-American War, and half of the land of Mexico is now America, and with it the people living on it, who were now cut off from ingredients they traditionally used as years went by. And the two cuisines, well, it's more than two. I mean, Mexican cuisine is Mexican cuisines. Nonetheless, Mexican food as made in Mexico and Mexican food as made in America diverged in many ways, to the point that Mexican-American is now, in my view, a cuisine of its own. But the fact of the matter is, that is the food of another country, Americanized. And Americanized is not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't make something, quote, inauthentic. It just makes it the developed version of that food that our culture has created here. You think of Chinese food, for example, as Chinese food developed in America, initially brought here by Chinese immigrants, workers actually, many of whom didn't intend to stay, who came over here for the gold rush in California, some as miners, some as restaurateurs and storekeepers to serve that population. That food was changed for the palate of Americans and diverged greatly from food as actually served in China. Although increasingly today, you're seeing food as served in China served here, because there is now such a Chinese population in America that that industry can actually support itself, not by selling to the rest of us, but by selling to folks with an actual Chinese heritage. However, Chinese food itself is changing. One of the most popular dishes in China these days is scrambled eggs and tomatoes, which you would not think of as a Chinese dish.
No.
But so this gets to the whole authenticity question of what is authentic food from someplace else in the first place.
Right. Well, I always said that America colonizes other countries by using McDonald's.
great story there. You know, the high-class hamburgers that you can pay $30 or $40 for at a white tablecloth restaurant?
Right.
Daniel Boulud, the famed Michelin-starred chef, was credited with really kicking off the gourmet hamburger boom in America back in the 90s, I believe it was. I talked to him about this. He made he still sells it. It's an incredible hamburger with foie gras on the inside. But I asked him what motivated him to do that, and it was his response to protests in France against McDonald's. Right. He thought, A, there's nothing wrong with McDonald's. B, don't go burning them down, which had happened in some small town. Oh. And C, it kind of spurred him to see what would the ultimate French hamburger be. And by all accounts, it's very good.
It's a heart attack waiting to happen.
Well, you're a vegetarian. Come on.
I know. Is that the one that has the gold leaf on it as well?
Very interesting. I discussed this in the book. There is a difference between a high-end hamburger that is culinarily legitimate and a gimmick. There was a restaurant in Vegas that was selling a hamburger for like $5,000.
Yeah.
With gold leaf on it, and it came with a bottle of Chateau Petrus. That's not food. That's PR. That's a gimmick. Daniel Boulud's hamburger, which sold at the time he introduced it for I think $38, which was a lot of money.
Well, it was
$28, and now sells for $38.
Right, but that's still for everything that was on it. That's actually a good deal.
It's terrific. I mean, it takes 24 hours to make this burger because not each one, but the pieces in it. He makes a fresh tomato compote. He puts foie gras in the center. He makes his own brioche bun. It is a very legitimate, for those of us who are carnivores, it's a very legitimate expression of his culinary skill and taste. I have no problem with that at all. Is that something you eat every day? Of course not. It's a special occasion thing. But it's a hell of a lot cheaper than going to that restaurant and ordering a steak. Yeah. It's actually in New York City, $38 for a white tablecloth meal isn't bad at all.
No, good Lord. Back in the 90s when I was in New York, just getting a salad was $20. I mean...
Yes, but it was a good salad.
Yes, it was a very good salad. All right. David, as we wrap up, is there anything else that you think listeners should know about in terms of either dining out, eating in, which is better in your opinion and cheaper?
Eat good food. Don't eat food. I live on a tourist island in South New Jersey, and I see people go to the supposedly great restaurants on the island where you take a piece of fish and then you cover the piece of fish with a sauce, and in the sauce is some crab, and on top of that is this. No. Good ingredients, prepared simply, but good ingredients. It's where you start with that really matters. And good food can be of any kind, but just eat good food.
Wait, one last question, talking about the good ingredients. Why is organic so much more expensive than not? Because with organic, you're not putting on all the pesticides and all of that. Why?
I'm the last person on earth to come out as an advocate for organic. It depends why you want it. If you want it because it's better food, I frequently have my doubts. If you want it to save the earth, more power to you, go for it. But I have yet to personally come to the conclusion that organic food necessarily tastes better than food that has been raised in a traditional way.
Tomatoes.
Tomatoes are different.
Tomatoes, the ones you get in the grocery store, have no flavor whatsoever. I have so many friends who swear they hated tomatoes until I gave them my homegrown organic tomatoes, and then they went, oh, that's what a tomato tastes like? And I'm like, yes.
But whether or not it's organic, it was homegrown. It was not the genetically modified tomato that was modified to be round for shipping. And that was the number one consideration. I live in New Jersey, where farmers all across the state produce some of the finest tomatoes on earth. I don't think most of them are organic, but I do know they're ugly, they're misshapen, They've been allowed to grow in a natural way, and they're delicious.
Thank you so much, David Page. Again, you are the author of Food Americana. Where can people get the book?
It's available at all of the major booksellers, Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Bookshop, all of your favorite places.
Great. Well, we'll be getting that soon. And you also created the TV program for Food Network, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. And I'm sure everybody is thanking you for that because that's a great show.
You're welcome. It was fun, as was talking with you today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. You can email me with any questions or topics you want to hear about at hkelly@ksl.com. That's HKELLY@ksl.com. And because this is Money Making Sense, you can subscribe for free on Spotify, Overcast, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to your favorite podcast, and you'll never miss another episode.
Thanks for being a Money Making Sense listener. Follow your common sense onto social media. Money Making Sense on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I'm Dave Cawley, host of the podcast Cold. Our brand new second season focuses on the 1985 disappearance of a woman named Joyce Yost. Hear her voice for the first time. That's Cold Season 2, exclusively on Amazon Music.